Parminder Singh ji. So synthesis, in my view, is when we bring different aspects of something together and we create something which is more complex than the parts. It's distinct to a summary. A summary is when, like in a story, we can have a long story and then we can summarize it. We kind of like just extract the core essence of it, whereas integration is we put different parts of an aspect together like a jigsaw puzzle, and that we can integrate it into one big story. But for me, synthesis is when we bring, like, let's say our Sikhi knowledge and our British knowledge, we put them together, and it's not just like this is Sikhi and this is the European education that we've received, but the synthesis is when we create like the bridges, and so it becomes something which is bigger than the two parts together. So this is similar to the systems thinking point of view. In systems thinking, synthesis is very important because it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Integration is when we put the parts together to make a whole, whereas synthesis is bigger than the parts put together. It's something that it's of a higher level of complexity than the parts were. Does that resonate with you? Is that your understanding of a synthesis as well?
Yeah, thank you for explaining.
Mm-hmm. So the purpose of this conversation is, I'll start by asking you like where you were educated. Myself, I was educated in Stafford. Most of my education took place in Stafford, and then I went away to university in different cities. But with my education, as I was growing up, there were very few Sikhi families in the town of Stafford. It's quite a small town, unlike Birmingham, where there is quite, Sikhism is the third largest religion in Birmingham. It's not like that in Stafford because we're a very small community. So for me, what I knew about Sikhi from my family and my community in the Gurdwara, what I knew about Sikhi was distinct to what I knew from school. And I didn't really have the opportunity to build bridges across these two broad kind of spectrums of knowledge because my family didn't know what I was being taught, and my teachers didn't know anything about Sikhi at all. Through none of my education, none of my teachers ever have known anything about my beliefs, my values. You know, they know who Gandhi is, and that's usually as far as it gets in terms of their knowledge of India. How about yourself? Were you able to integrate and to synthesize the different aspects of knowledge, or did you also put them in two separate boxes for a large time of your education?
So I grew up in Birmingham, but when I was at primary school, my parent in the late 70s, early 80s, my family decided to move out into the suburbs, and they moved to an area of Birmingham, which at that time in the early 80s was predominantly white area. So it's an area called Great Bar in North Birmingham. And so we went from being, if you like, a majority of brown people to being a minority in the school. And in primary school, that wasn't a problem. I guess there were loads of microaggressions, as they're called now. But at that time, I guess we weren't aware of those kinds of things. And obviously, from a family perspective, you were expected just to get on with it, and not to fixate on racism or microaggressions or being treated differently. You're expected to get on with it. But I did grow up feeling very different and not feeling connected. And then when I went to secondary school, again, for most of the time, I was the only person from a South Asian background in school. I didn't have GAES at that time. So I guess people talk about integration and not having your Sikhi Sarup and how that might help you. Certainly was not my experience, because you were still seen as the other at school. What was very interesting for me, of course, was so the school was predominantly white working class families. What was very interesting for me was that I was a second generation migrant, but I was a lot more capable. and especially in terms of English. I had better English than people who've been brought up in it. Of course, I was bilingual. I was also able to, just to study and get on with it, which I think a lot of the, my peers struggled with. And I think some of that is to do with I bring it back to Guru Nanak's teaching around Garcha Kamal more widely in terms of applying oneself in life, and whether it's education, whether it's employment, whatever, and bringing a sense of resilience. So there was a lot of racism at that time. I mean, would never have believed that there would be a Gurdwara in Great Bar like there is now. At that time, you were spat at in the street. You were name called. It was the norm. But I don't want to dwell on that. What I want to say is that at that time, Sikhi for me, even though I probably didn't realize it, it was an inner strength, and it did provide that resilience for me to get me through that stage of my life. And it did instill, if you think about where's the foundation for our success as a migrant group come from, it does come from our Sikhi. I firmly believe that it comes from the teachings, the values, all of the inspiration that we get from the Sakhis and from our history. Whether we're aware of it or whether we're not, it is always there in our psyche. And so for me, we didn't, and then when we moved to Great Bar, we didn't go to the Gurdwara as often as we did when we lived in Perry Bar, where every Sunday we used to walk to the Gurdwara and we used to go. So we ended up being in a situation where we'd only go on invitation. Whereas when we lived in the community, if you like, we went more often. However, we still had Sikhi in the house. Obviously we had, we had our, Bart and everything else going on in the house. And we had a lot of family. So my parents were prolific virtually. So they're constantly matchmaking. So I always tell my children, you won't believe what you spend your time going on package holidays as children. My memory of as a child is going to weddings. And that's what we did in the summer holidays, was some, going to people's weddings, going to, different, family functions up and down the country. And I guess through, again, even that you could argue is Sangat, is bringing different Sangat together. And again, having that energy from the Sangat, whether one is aware of it or not at the time, it does provide you with the sense of self and sense of community that otherwise one may not have had.
Absolutely. And when the stories that you have just told, they are great examples of how we learn through osmosis. We learn through being with people who we're either going to consciously or unconsciously imitate and learn from. And even though it's not a formal classroom situation, we're learning, and we learn values like loyalty. You might have wanted to go on holiday abroad, but nevertheless you went to a wedding instead, because that's, you needed to demonstrate loyalty and to your family and to the people getting married. And so is that we learn those values, that sometimes it's not just about our individual interests. We have to think about the interests of others and be part of a team rather than an individual. This reminds me of one of my teacher colleagues on a teacher training course. They were trying to say, oh, we need to do group work because students need to develop their teamwork skills, and we have a lot of students from India and China who don't like working in groups. And I said, well, the reason they don't like working in groups is because they haven't paid thousands of pounds to work in groups. And you can't say, oh, you've got to develop your teamwork skills, because people who come from those cultures have already developed their teamwork skills. We develop those teamwork skills not by doing artificial group exercises in a classroom situation. We develop those skills from, as you say, showing loyalty, showing allegiance, showing kind of you know that the greater family is more valuable and than your individual self, isolated as it were. So you see, as both of us being educators, we know that so much of the education takes place in the community, it takes place outside of the classroom. But when we don't see that reflected in the classroom, we're kind of at a disadvantage that we do overcome. You've overcome it, I've overcome it, most of us, we do manage to overcome it, but it is nevertheless, it requires more effort for us to, when we don't see ourselves reflected in the literature that we're that is used to teach us, we have to create our own stories and build our own strength, regardless of the fact that we're not reflected. But also there is this thing about, as educators, we know that it's easier to learn something when we can attach it to something that we already know. So for example, you mentioned Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and when I learned about I learned about Martin Luther at school. And when I learned about Martin Luther, immediately I thought, well, Guru Nanak Ji was a contemporary. No one, my teachers didn't know that, but I made the connection. And in making that connection, I was able to remember like what the ideologies were, and the ideologies of Guru Nanak Dev and Martin Luther in terms of having direct access to God without the fact that the priest wasn't, it wasn't kind of necessary to have an intermediary between ourselves and God. I could see those similarities, and in making that association, I was able to remember that those concepts and those values. But if I wasn't able to make the connection, for example, a connection that I've only made recently is about our seventh Guru, Guru Harai, and his environmentalism, and Newton was a contemporary of Guru Harai, but I'd not made that connection of like thinking, well, they lived in the same kind of era, but Newton was advocating the logic, the mechanistic, the atomistic, the leading up to the Industrial Revolution, whereas Guru Harai was advocating environmentalism. And it's as though we followed the path of the scientific method and kind of forgot about the environmentalism and the ecology. So tell me, when you were studying, did you make the connection between the scientific, the industrial revolutions and our gurus and how they were, what their points of view were about it?
Not when I was doing secondary education. I think that I would say that I probably came more into practicing Sikhi later than at that time, and I certainly didn't make those links at that time. But in terms of looking at, if you like, how ahead of their time the gurus were, I think that probably came later for me. Probably when I was at university, when I realised, like about Guru Harai, about what Guru Nanak Dev Ji and the other gurus said about women, but also what they said about equality, but also the when we talk about miracles, and it's a very important thing in other religions, but if you think about what the gurus achieved at that time, just Guru Nanak Dev Ji going on his udasis, that is a miracle. That he went in all four directions, on foot, and that he was able to not only converse, but he was able to inspire and uplift people everywhere he went, through his words. That power, that miracle is amazing to me, that he could do that, and that even today you have people, in the wider Sikh community, not Punjabi Sikhs, who still follow Guru Nanak Dev Ji to this day. That is the true miracle for me. And soon as also and also when you look at Guru Gobind Singh Ji and some of his teachings, and the fact that he was not just, he's always depicted as being the warrior, but actually he wasn't just a warrior. He was an amazing poet as well, but he was also a visionary. And when you look at their lives, their lives were miracles. you know, what they achieved, what they did, and how they inspired in such a short space of time, as well. So, and you think about the 200 plus years that Sikhi evolved during the Guru's times, and then the history that came after that, and the very difficult history that we've had. It's a miracle that we're talking today.
Mhm.
It's a miracle that we are so, you know, all across the world, probably nearly every country in the world, there is a Sikh Sangat, you know, in such a short space of time, and that we have this connection to Sangat and to Guru, even if we are aware of it or not. And I think that is for me, that is just is such a miracle that is alive today.
Yes, and yeah, that the teachings have survived and that they're tried and tested. But it's when, you know, there's suddenly this kind of interest in the West about climate change and environmentalism. It's through that lens that I look at Guru Harai's work and era, and I think, well, that was 400 years ago almost, that he was advocating this ecological kind of harmony. And how is it that we forgot about it? And then I think about the farmers in the Punjab now, and it's great that the farmers, you know, made a stand for their livelihoods, but nevertheless, we have to admit that the soil in Punjab is being depleted. We have to admit that they're not living in harmony with the environment, the farmers, because they have bought into the Western kind of concept of like, let's try and get 4 crops rather than just 1 crop, and you know, no kind of like leaving the fields to fallow and whatever. So where is it that we have forgotten our own education that has been passed down for centuries? You know, we have been farmers not for a few hundred years, we've been farmers for thousands of years. Why is it that we have forgotten how to do simple things like look after the land, because we have elevated the Western way of doing things? What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I agree absolutely with what you said in terms of, if we go back, and even if we go back to some of the if you like, the philosophy from that part of the world, you know, call it India, call it Bharat, whatever, and the connection to land. You know, we say Mata Tarta Mahat, you know, and so all of that philosophy, but not just about environmentalism, but also about living consciously, conscious living, in terms of our behaviors, our attitudes, and our contribution, but also how we tread on this earth in terms of our consumption. And obviously, from a Sikh perspective, Guru Granth Sahib is our manual for living. It's the instructions by how we can live consciously. But we don't take, all of us must, and I count myself in this, we don't take heed of that wisdom and that knowledge in our everyday actions. And so the more and more we as all of us can shine a light on those teachings, and every day try and practice them, because that's what's happened in Punjab. They're not practicing the teachings, you know, they're following you know, for economic purposes, following Maya, if you like. But you can understand that, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, my family from a farming background, they have to, at the end of the day, they have to do their get the kamai too. But the question is, it goes back to the Sakhi about Bhai Lallo, doesn't it? And Sacha Sauda, about living ethically, living consciously. And the problem is that all of these Sakhis have become stories rather than tools for living, rather than teaching for us. And I think the more we can educate ourselves in spiritual education, not just, if you like, worldly or economic education, the more that we can live gracefully, but also more we can live in alignment with the teachings. Because as I said, I came into practicing Sikhi a lot later in my life, and I always think, what if I had taken this leap of faith a lot earlier? Would my life have been different? What how all of the tools that I now have at my disposal that come from the gurus and come from Gurbani. If I had those tools earlier, how might have my life had unfolded in a more successful path if I had that awareness at that time. And I think that the more that we can live by the teachings, not just preach them or talk about them, because what's happened is that we've started to put started at the beginning talking about history. We put our history in a box or under a microscope. We look at it and we don't really recognize the patterns and the relevance of all of those teachings to us today. And that is the real tragedy. And even all of the Gurbani and the Shabads, they actually are relevant to us today. And we can take a lot of, they're the tools that we've been given by the gurus to really help us live consciously and to live have the best possible life as a human on planet Earth at this time that we can. But the issue that we have is that people aren't really taught the teachings, if you like. They're not disseminated as tools. They're disseminated almost as how can I describe it, as a thing that you do, as a ritual, rather than as a tool. So for me, the turning point, I have to say, is when I realized that it's not just it's not just Bard that I read. It's a tool that's going to help me. It's an anchor. It's something that's going to really help me to manage myself, manage my expectations, and also to help me to cope with all of the things that happen in life, but also to elevate me as well and bring a sense of joy and bliss too. There's no coincidence that we always read Anand Sahib, at the end, we want to lift ourselves. Sikhi is all about, I always say Sikhi is about Anand, it's all about bliss. But how often do we actually talk about it, that we're actually, what the Guru is telling us to do is to live in bliss. We don't talk about that. We don't share that with our families and in our communities. And we use history as a way of almost bringing guilt and sort of persecuting ourselves about these things have happened to us, and we move into a kind of victimhood. I'm not saying that we shouldn't acknowledge or commemorate or learn from history. Absolutely, we must. But at the same time, we must. We, as I said earlier, it's a miracle. Everything that's happened to us, that we are here, and that we are, that we are going strong. In 550 plus years, it really is. Sikhi really is a miracle that we, everything that we've achieved in such a short space of time. And the more we start recognizing the good that we're doing in the world and all of the great things that we're doing, we have a tendency to fixate on what's not working well. Even when 80% of what we're doing is going well, in my view. We fixate on the 20% which isn't working well. What I would like us to do as a community is to start working on our strengths and really building on all the good stuff that we've got, because we've got such a good story to tell the world in terms of the teachings, in terms of the technology of the Guru Granth Sahib, and all of our other Bani and literature. And we've got so many talented people in our community. Such a small community, and we punch above our weight, and it's because we've got the Shakti, if you like, the power, whether we recognize it or not, from the Gurus, and that's what I would like to see. That would be my vision, is in terms of how do we take this synthesis, or how do we take all this history, all this knowledge, all these tools that we have, and how do we transmit them in terms of Guru Nanak's mission about the whole of the world, not just the little Punjabi community. And that's how I, in terms of synthesis, that's for me, that is the vision. But that vision is not really being disseminated by the so-called leaders. When does anyone talk about growing the community, We don't talk about community growth in its various forms. When do we ever talk about, spreading the tools, the messages, the technology of Sikhi? Very few people are doing it. And that's what I think we should be doing. We should be talking about we've got these wonderful tools. How do we spread them? How do we share them with the world? Because that's what Guru Nanak wanted us to do. That's what he did, and so did the other gurus. They could have happily stayed in their Pora Sahib or stayed in Kartarpur. They didn't do that. They went out into the world. And I really feel that we've got so much to share with the world, that we could really be uplifting people. We've got some good examples of people like Ravi Singh from Khalsa Aid that are doing that kind of thing. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to do our little bit in the world from the teachings of Sikhi.
Well, I mean, Sikhi is not meant to be a missionary religion. And I think that's one of the strengths of it, in fact, is that we don't go around trying to convert other people to Sikhi thinking, like that our way is better than their own way. Because what Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, he traveled for decades with a companion who was always Muslim. His companion was never changed his religion from Islam. And I think Balla, another friend of his, was a Hindu, and he remained a Hindu for his whole life. And so I think the fact that we're not a missionary religion, in the same way that Judaism is not a missionary religion, there are several religions that are. Hinduism is not a missionary religion. It's not our, it can be seen to be quite egotistical to be preaching to others, and trying to encourage them to adopt our beliefs. I think, my understanding of Sikhi is that we allow others to be who they are, and the focus is on learning and to demonstrate our own knowledge, but it's definitely not meant to be a missionary religion, for one thing. And the other thing is about Khalsa Aid, for example. It's great that there is a lot of visibility for Sikhs, doing langar, but it's meant to be, it's not meant to be something that we do in order to brand ourselves. It's not meant to be for show. So there is a danger in terms of ethics. It's like, how much of this langar seva is about getting in front of the camera and saying, look how good we are, so there is that ethical concern as well that I see. That I go to the Gurdwara in Stafford and we have a quiet langar, but we don't broadcast it. We don't kind of like say, look how well we're doing. When there was that truck kind of all those queues after Brexit, and the Khalsa Aid were delivering, it seemed a little bit like propaganda in my view. So we do, again, it's like, let's have debates about this. Ethics is a major issue, and unless we discuss it and debate it and say, well, look, this is the reason that we try and be humble about it, not use it as a, to win awards. It's like, what's this thing about winning awards for doing seva? It's like, is that really seva then, or is that PR?
I think I agree with everything that you said, but I didn't talk about missionary. That's your word, not mine. And I didn't talk about about converting people. That's your interpretation of what I said. I talked about sharing the tools, and I talked about inspiring people. But I and I don't agree with what you said about Bhai Mardana, and I don't agree with what you said about Bhai Balla or any of those other historic Sikhs. But that's not what today's discussion is about. I believe that all of these individuals who were associated with the Guru were Sikhs, because what is a Sikh? A Sikh is a learner. They were all learning from the Guru. They accepted Guru Nanak Dev Ji as the Guru. So I think that it's the definition of a Sikh, I guess. And because we've got these Western words that we're using to describe the process by which somebody follows the Guru, because what is a Guru? A Guru is that which takes you from from the gu, the darkness, to the ru, which is the light. And so, because we're talking in English, we're using sort of Western concepts and words. I don't think the missionary kind of thing is describes the process by which somebody becomes attuned or inspired by a guru. That's a different kind of process. So I think we're talking about different things. But I accept what you're saying, and the view. In terms of the thing about getting awards for seva, that's very interesting, because I think I agree with the principle of what you're saying about the importance of the value of humility. So if you think about the name Nanak, Nanak, in Punjabi culture, your ego is represented by your nose. The person without a nose is the person who has humility. And that's the value by which we think of Guru Nanak, and the first value in terms of nimmarta and humility. So absolutely, I think that's important. But in terms of people from Sikh background being recognized and acknowledged for what they're doing in the community, whether and recognized more widely, I actually want to see more of that. I actually think that in terms of representation of Sikhs and people understanding who we are, what we do, what our philosophy is, I think it's wonderful that that we have more of that. If it's an award, I don't have a problem with that at all. For me, because the humility is your own personal, it's your personal shraddha. If your intention is to go out to get awards, then there's a question there about ethics. But if somebody recognizes you for what you've done and gives you an award, then that's a wonderful thing. And I'd like to see more visibility for Sikhs. But I also think that we should have that visibility, and we should be doing the work around inspiring and uplifting humanity, because that's what good. And I would not call that missionary. Missionary is something quite sinister, actually. That's not what Sikh is about. Inspiring people we can't really put that in the same category as missionary work, because missionary work was not acknowledging people's heritage, not acknowledging where they're coming from, and disempowering them, not giving them agency. And that's what Sikhi is about. It's about empowerment. And so we shouldn't really compare what other traditions do to what Guru Nanak and all of the Sikhs. Because if you think, my family probably was from a Hindu family at some point, and somebody somewhere inspired them at some point to leave that particular tradition and to join the Sikh tradition. And so were those people missionaries? Were we converted? To me, that's irrelevant, because if you think about it from a Gurbani perspective, it's that it's by your good fortune that you're blessed to find the Guru in this lifetime. So I don't think that we should be using phrases like missionary to anything in terms of Sikh philosophy. That's the wrong kind of colonial kind of perspective to look at what the process of being inspired by a guru can do to a person. And I've met many people over the years who are from a different tradition, who came into Sikhi, and some of them I count as my friends too. And when you talk to them, and when they tell you about their journey, there was never any coercion in their journey. It was, and I would never describe it as a missionary thing. It was all about inspiration, and most of them describe it as coming home. That when we found the Guru, we came home. And so, there's many shabads that talk about, that it's written on your forehead, that's preordained destiny, by great fortune I found the Guru. And so we need to think about it in that term, that Jinni Naam Pe Aaya, the ones who are blessed, that they are going to come into the Sikhi path. But our jobs as Sikhs is to disseminate it. And dissemination is not the same as missionary work. So just a little bit of a challenge there for you, Benji. I hope you don't mind.
No, because those are not my own words, you see. I've heard Sikhi described in those ways of that, you know, these religions are missionary religions and these religions are not. So I'm simply repeating what I've heard, so I'm not attached to it. And yeah, because I used to be part of a lot of interfaith organizations back in London, and through the interfaith work we did often debate about, you know, the difference, it's like ideologically, of like, where are we going to be accused of converting, you know, so it's simply just a debate, it's not
yeah, sure. Yeah, so for us it's about the Gurbanis is straight on this matter, that it's about if from before, they were preordained to step on the path, and so our job as Sangat is to support them in their journey, and often that doesn't happen actually. You know, the number of some people who are not embraced by Gurdwara and by Punjabi Sikhs in particular. You know, we're not, as a Sangat, when we are not all embracing in the way that we might think we are. We're certainly not inclusive as we think we are. So we're very quick to talk about the theory, you know, and recite shabas like Jokumanda Kiye, you know, and things like that, and Manis ki jaat sab ek pehchan bo, but we don't practice it. So the challenge that I'm putting to the community, I guess, is that let's start practicing what we preach. Let's start practicing the values.
We do categorize,
Yeah.
don't we? We categorize, even, you know, within Sikhi, we categorize, and again, this is one of the a Western writer. I think she's from Coventry University or Warwick University. I remember attending a talk by her at the University of Birmingham, and she, in one of her talks, she was saying that, I think she gets involved with interfaith work as well, and she said it's much easier to bring people together from different religions compared with people who have different beliefs within the same religion. So Sikhi being one of them. So in terms of interfaith, we're all, you know, we're willing to be open to Christians and Muslims and Buddhists, and because what they believe is quite distant to what we believe. We're not so sensitive about that because there is that distance. But whereas put us together with somebody who also calls themselves a Sikh and their beliefs are contrary to our own, like some people believe in, you know, that we can't be worshipping somebody who's a living Baba, you know, we only worship the Guru Granth Sahib, and there can be sensitivities around our interpretation of that. And so it's much harder to have intra-faith meetings rather than interfaith meetings.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you. But I think linked to that is the point I was making about inclusion. And I think one of the things that I actually think all of this, because we have a diverse Banth, a diverse Sikh Banth, and it's actually a strength from, as I can see, in terms of because it's like it's akin to a tree with various branches, and so the last thing we'd want to do is you know, poison the roots, if you like, or chop down the branches. We wouldn't want to do that. You know, we actually want the tree to be blossoming. And so my personal view is, and this is, you know, is that we should embrace the diversity that we have. And when you know, all of these different views about Baba or about you know, different types of worship within the Sikh tradition, in my mind, it's semantics. At the end of the day, are they following? Are they practicing the teachings? Are they living the values? That's what we should be focused on. And if you look at any of the, you know, some of the Sikh media, it's very much focused on the semantics. It's focused on the journey, not the destination. You know, the destination in terms of what's our vision for the community. That's what should be we should be debating and discussing, really, is rather than getting fixated about, oh, you didn't read this verse, or you didn't do this ardas, or you didn't do you know what I mean? It's semantic. It's because if we believe in Shraddha and we believe in, you know, personal devotion, then it's your personal devotion. It's what you're bringing to it through your humility, in terms of your, you know, your personal connection to your guru, not necessarily what's prescribed. And I think because and and so a much better, more constructive way forward for our community that would bring healing is to be focused on what's the future look like. Where do we want to be in 50 years time? Where do we want to be in 100 years time? And no, I have never come across, people talking about that. And we spend most of our time talking about, we spend a lot of time talking about the past, and that's good. We should talk about the history. But what percentage of our time and energy and effort is spent on talking about the future and where we want to be? And I think it's a bit out of kilter as a community.
Well, this is where there's that constant tension, which isn't simply in Sikhi. Constant tension in most cultures, I would imagine, is the tension between what our individual vision is compared with what our collective vision is. And so, when we think about the Enlightenment, the age of the Enlightenment in the 17th century, we think about the individualism that arose from that, because if we take away the rights of the priest to be the intermediary, and we say that we are, masters of our own destiny, as it were, and are we masters of our own destiny at the individual level, or are we masters of our own destiny at the collective level as well? And then if we're talking about the collective vision, well, who gets to decide? That's when the sensitivities come into play. It's like, no, this is the right path. No, that's the right path. And so which is the right path? And earlier on, you were saying about how you came into Sikhi later on in your education, and you kind of like sometimes wonder how it would have been if you'd come to Sikhi like maybe in your formative years. And I think that the way life works is that we are educated and we learn what we need to learn at the right time and in the right place in different languages. I only read and write Punjabi just enough to read the Japji Sahib and the Reras, and I can read, those scriptures, but I can't read the Guru Granth Sahib yet. I haven't been able to read that well, but I think that I have been able to draw on the knowledge that I need for this point in my life. And if I need more knowledge than this, I'm sure that life will find a way to get to, enable me to gain that knowledge, regardless of which language it's in. It could come in a very different language to the language that is there in the Granth Sahib. We could find that same knowledge in different areas. It's not, because even our gurus took poetry from Kabir and, the Sufis, and they kind of left it in their own, the local vernaculars, and they incorporated that. And I think for me, that metaphor is that it doesn't necessarily have to be, I won't read about truth in Punjabi, in Gurmukhi necessarily. I might read it in a totally different vernacular.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think that, again, going back to my point about us being blessed, so I always say that this is the time to be one of the best times in history to be a Sikh, whether we appreciate it or not, because going back to the point you were making about being able to not to have an intermediary, to have that direct connection with the Guru, that we're able to do that on our phones, and never in history has that situation where an individual can connect with the Guru instantaneously at any point in the day, with any shabad that they want within a couple of clicks and swipes on a phone. So we and the translations as well, and there's so much resources and materials out there, and so many great teachers as well who are able to explain Bart and everything else that you need. And also lots of different, going back to the point about inclusion and diversity, so many different sangats that could resonate for an individual more so than before, and even online sangat. So to give you an example, I mean, we did our sangat online during the whole of the pandemic, and we would never have thought that we could connect people in that way. So I think we are blessed to have so many resources, and similarly resources from outside our community too, as you mentioned. It all goes back to what resonates for you at that time in your life and what you need to hear.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that, life with its divine intelligence knows what we need. But this leads me to my final question for you. My final question is about, in the first, second, and third industrial revolution, like in the first industrial revolution, the steam engine led to mass production, and we were not, as Punjabis, we were not able to compete. Obviously, we weren't able to compete against the East India Tea Company that managed to colonize us, because they had the advantage of the industrial revolution behind them, the steam engine. And then we've got electricity, the second industrial revolution. Then we've got computers, and we were kind of like catching up at that point, having recently gained our independence, at least on a physical level, not at the mind level. But now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, where it seems to me that we are at last, in terms of education, we're on a level playing field, because we have access to cyberspace, like yourself and myself having this conversation. We have access to all the resources that we could possibly need. We're not kind of catching up as we were in previous revolutions. Here, we're on it's down to us now to take advantage of these opportunities, but ethics will need to be something that we take into consideration. How are we going to use cyberspace and the intelligence available to us in an ethical way?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the opportunities around technology. However, I would also say that there are, in terms of power structures, however, there are other forces at play. So just as the thing that comes to my mind as somebody who works in the public sector are things like systemic racism. So even though we have the resources, we have the intelligence, we have the attitude, aptitude, and the application, there are other invisible forces at play that may hinder our success and our progress. So the question is, how do we use the tools that we have, whether it's physical tools or skills or spiritual tools, in order to navigate that space and not to let it defeat us in the way that the East India Company did many years ago.
Yeah.
In today's world, that we are able to be one step ahead.
Yeah, East India Tea Company, they had the systems in place, they had the infrastructure, and also, the scientific revolution, it began here in Britain, it began in Europe. So of course it didn't start in the Punjab. We have to acknowledge that. And so they did have the advantage of technology, which we didn't have. But now we can't use that as an excuse, because we have, yes, there is systemic racism. And I know that in Punjab, they don't, when I talk about systemic racism to our relatives and our friends in the Punjab, they don't know what we're talking about. And we have to have lived it and experienced it to know how painful that can be. And one of the reasons that I use cyberspace for organizing my conferences is because there is a level playing field. I get to decide who gets to speak, and very often in leadership conferences, I have been to leadership and creativity conferences organized by universities where I don't see people who look like myself in, taking prominent positions. And so therefore I create the space where it's a level playing field. In cyberspace, we don't have to try and struggle for a seat at somebody else's table. We create our own tables.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the opportunities of technology, there's a lot there. But I think that in terms of, because you talked about Punjab, I think for me, what I would question is about aspiration as well. So one could argue that they have technology, they have access to a lot of the tools that we have, they have access to higher education. But it seems to me that there is an aspiration deficit because if you think about the average young person in Punjab, it's about migration is the main career aspiration, rather than thinking about becoming, a tech savvy person or a business startup. And so there's something there, And then the other thing for us as a community is that, do we only think of, if you like, as Sikh Panth as being centered in Punjab? Well, a small portion of Punjab, it has to be said, not the full Punjab. Or do we now start thinking about Sikh Panth as being global? So when we use the motto Raj Karega Khalsa, should we be thinking more widely in terms of global? Because certainly the gurus would have been thinking wider than just a portion of the Punjab. And so therefore that goes back to the point I was making before. What's our vision? What's our strategy? And obviously, as you say, technology has got to feature in that technology, in that future vision, because it provides us a really good space and platform to organize and to coordinate, to share ideas, and to bring Sangat together. So if we were to create, if you like, a virtual Sikh Qawm across the world, technology would be key in order to maintain that connectivity. But where is the vision to do that? Where is the infrastructure? And why is it always down to individuals rather than institutions to be taking these things forward? So there's a question about leadership capacity, organization, vision, and people in our community stepping forward to do adaptive leadership in terms of having those difficult conversations, having the ability to turn up the heat, when to address some of the challenging issues. And then the other thing for me, which I started talking about at the beginning, is, do we live our values? We talk about Punjab and obviously female infanticide, which is completely anti-Sikhi. The Gurus even said that we mustn't associate with people who practice it. Is rife. And so until we start living the values, I feel that we can't. We're almost on in a sort of Groundhog Day as a community until we start living the values. So many Shabads tell us to wake up, don't they? They say, come on, and there's a lot of repetition in Gurbani, and it's because we are stuck. And what I would like to see in the next decade is for us to start, waking up and recognizing what we have, and then to start shining and sharing and inspiring ourselves first. If we inspire ourselves first, Manjit te Jagjit, then we go out into the world and we share these values and these teachings. The way we share them is by living them, not by proselytizing, is by living the values. And then everybody will want to be a part of that, because they can see it's a living dharam, it's a way of life. It's not something that's in a book. So that's probably a good point to end.
Yeah,
positive message for everybody is that let's start living the values. Let's put them into practice. And the more we do that, the more we will move forward, day by day, step by step. But let's start talking about a vision, and maybe your next conference could explore that topic. What's our vision for the next 25 years? What's our vision for 50 years? Because we don't even have a UK vision, do we? What's the UK vision for Sikhs? What's the Birmingham vision for Sikhs? We don't have that. So it would be good to have apart from people, our community wanting to move out, there is no vision, is there? So the question is, what is the vision?
We're always looking for the next best thing, aren't we?
That's not Sikhi. That is not Sikhi.
Well, I mean, we're always kind of like looking to improve our lives in some way, aren't we? So this kind of like wanting to go to the next place. It's like there is an element of searching for the truth, I suppose, isn't there?
But the answer is always within, from a Sikhi perspective. You know, Antaragat Tirat Malnao. If you're gonna go on a pilgrimage, look within yourself. Take a pilgrimage, Ishnan, within yourself. It's that introspection that we don't have. But maybe I don't. I'm just putting it out there really, that it would be good for us to start talking about what are and if every city did that with a Sikh population, if we had a vision for our towns, our cities, and then you build that up into a vision for, you know, our country. And UK, we could have, you know, 4 visions for the 4 nations, and then a UK-wide vision, and you build it up, and then we have you know, on a global scale, what's our vision? What's the vision for European Sikhs? And I just feel that at the moment, the only vision seems to be what you just described, looking for the next best thing. And that's not necessarily a healthy thing. So I think for me, that would be a good starting point if we all start thinking about what's the vision. And it could start from a grassroots perspective. So you could say, okay, my neighborhood, my Sangat, all the Sikhs get together and let's talk about our vision for our Sangat. What is it? What are we trying to achieve in the next 25 years? Is it that we want to get more of our young people to Oxbridge? Is it that we want to have more of our young people doing apprenticeships? Is it that we want, you know, to more of our young people being self-employed and setting up their own businesses? You know, is it we want to be ecologically conscious, or is it that we want to build another 5 big gurdwara? You know, what is it that we want? You know, and I don't think that we know that, and that's why we're looking for Maya rather than looking for something that's going to do sarbat dapala, which is what the life of the Sikh is intended for. So that's my call to arms to everybody, really.
Okay, all right, well done. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and I really enjoyed my conversation with you. Sat Sri Akal ji, Waheguru ji ka Khalsa.
Waheguru ji ki Fateh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.